In late spring of 1971, two brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, were playing in their garden. As they played and looked for things to throw, they began to dig in the dirt and found something that seemed both interesting and strange. The boys had dug up two small heads carved in stone, roughly the size of an orange or a tennis ball. The stone heads had flecks of greenish-grey and glistened with quartz crystal. The heads seemed to be carved of local stone and had irregularly shaped features. Holes for the mouth and eyes, ridges for the nose, and they were not identical. Fascinated by the mysterious treasure they had found, they both decided to keep them. Little did they know all the strange things that would happen from then on.
Hey friends, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, man.
Hey, dude.
Hey, pal.
Hey, man.
Looks like we're...
No, it doesn't.
No. It looks like we're back to the land of the therianthropes, if you will.
I know, man. It's like we can't... Somehow...
Or shapeshifters.
Yeah. I mean, I think... I don't know if this is part of synchronicity, but somehow we end up accidentally staying in whatever topic it is that we've talked about before a little bit, you know?
Well, I mean, I think we've said it before. It really does, like... For Woody and I mean, literally since we've started this podcast, it's like we've gotten to the point where we just sort of follow wherever these synchronicities kind of like lead us, you know, and it's always the most sort of happenstance, like unplanned thing. But it's like, you know, we'll be talking about, I mean, for example, like this, we just had a show on shapeshifters, which, like we said then, that's just a primer. We're going to do more and get into the more of the specifics of the therianthrope. But then we kind of thought of, well, hey, let's do, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've been wanting to do the show on the Hexham Heads. Let's do this. Come to find out, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of shapeshifter type stuff going on with this one too. So, you know, we just go down that rabbit trail.
I know, man. Let's get into it, dude.
Let's do it.
All right. Like you said, this is something that we've talked about. I mean, honestly, like we have this growing list of potential topic ideas, and we'll kind of just like read through them every couple of weeks and say, okay, well, oh man, I forgot about this one. Hey, we really need to do this one. And this has been one that's on that list from the early on, dude. First season, first early episodes, and we're just finally getting to it. And I'm super pumped about that. I mean, it is one of those things where, you know, it kind of just the mystery of it all and just imagining being one of these kids and all the things that surround these strange heads that they found. So as we dive in, let's just kind of go back to 1971. These two brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, which I continually mistaken for Robinson, but it is actually Robson, were living in Hexham, England. They were kind of just, as we said in the beginning, just playing outside and stuff, digging around in the garden. You know, some accounts say that they were like looking for things to throw at each other. Who knows?
Well, that's what I read too, is actually the only reason that they were even digging up rocks were like, they were digging to get rocks to like toss at each other. So that was the only reason that they were even, it was like real fast, like a game of like, you know,
hit your brother with a rock or catch. So they're digging around. They find this stone. They kind of pull it out, and all of a sudden they're just like, huh? And notice that these features are carved into this stone. Now, now being, after this, having this podcast and stuff, I would think of it differently. But as a kid, I would just be like, oh man, look what I found. This is amazing. You know, I wouldn't think it was, potentially, I don't know, bad or evil in any sense. You know, I would just kind of be like, oh man, this is a cool artifact, Indiana Jones style, you know?
Yeah. Well, they thought it was cool. I mean, I don't think they initially even thought that it was anything weird until, what followed.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like us up in our like where we live and,
Indian stuff.
Yeah, man, you can find like arrowheads and stuff quite often. And it's like, you don't think twice about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
But what we've learned from the Charanga stone.
Charanga.
Season 2, episode 28, the Charanga stone.
Charanga!
It may not always be a good idea.
Yeah. Might be a better idea to just kind of leave things where they are.
Well, and also to that, Woody and I both being kids growing up in the 80s and stuff, like much of you are, I feel like that was something that was like really sort of embedded in popular culture. Like, you had like Poltergeist. They were like building the pool on top of a Indian burial ground or Pet Cemetery or like all these like sort of cursed kind of like artifacts and the curses that they would sort of the things that would happen
almost.
yeah. So like I don't know, are we sort of conditioned to feel that way, or is there actual truth to it?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about
for this case.
Well, let's not get into. Don't bury the lead here. Let's talk about these. Let's get some descriptives on these heads here. So the heads are about the size of a tennis ball or like an orange, and could easily fit in the palm of either the boys' hands. They were mostly round, but had like these human facial features that had been like carved into them. One of the heads looks more like a masculine face, and the stone that it was carved from was the greenish-grey stone with like the flecks of the crystal or the quartz crystals.
The quartz, yeah.
And it kind of gave it a sort of like shimmery appearance. The other head was more female-like and is even described to be similar to like a witch.
Yeah, or a hag. Yeah.
Or like a hag, yeah. In the carvings of her head, there were remnants of yellow and red coloring.
Yeah, and they would call, like Woody said, they would call them the boy or the girl.
Yeah, they got super creative.
Anytime we refer to, yeah, very creative.
So, again, like I said, they're excited about this. They think they just uncovered treasure, at the very least, as a kid. Not in 1971, but like me as a kid, like I said, I would have been like, oh my gosh, man, Indiana Jones. I mean, who knows? We can maybe there's a museum. Maybe I can call the Tyler's favorite. Maybe I can call the...
Don't do it.
What are they called?
Smithsonian. Do not call them.
Maybe I can get the Smithsonian over here.
Never call the Smithsonian.
So then they take them inside. And that's just the beginning. They think, oh man, this is cool. And, I imagine they just kind of like put them up on their shelves. I'm looking around the old studio here and all the artifacts that, we have from the toys from our childhood and VHS tapes and books and comics and all that stuff. I imagine doing the same kind of thing. You just place that cool item on the shelf and whatever. Well, then
and in your case, it's like, place that cool item on the shelf and just take that artwork that Tyler gave you as a gift and just throw it on the ground.
Table. No, just put it on a table.
Every time I come over, my artwork is on the ground.
No, just one of them. It's not on the ground even. Stop. So right whenever they brought it into the house is kind of when things started happening that were super strange, super weird.
Yeah.
Poltergeist-like activity began to occur within the home, and it was almost impossible for it not to just seem like this has to be due to these heads. Like, listen to this. The heads would sometimes roll around or even end up being thrown across the room at weird times of the day and at night. They also noticed that sometimes the heads seemed to rotate of their own accord. Like they would be, situated on a shelf, for example, like kind of facing and looking towards the left. And, later on in the day, they're looking in the opposite direction. No one's been home. No one's touched them. That's just the way they're looking. And also strange things kind of revolved around other members of the family. Like they had 2 sisters. And they found like shards of glass in their beds. The parents started having like these crazy headaches, and also, and here's one that's like super interesting. There was also this like really weird, there was this really strange glow that emanated from the patch of garden where the heads had been found.
Yeah, they basically, this bush would kind of pop up right around the area, because I think it was after they found the head, like a good while after. But right where they dug up the heads, this sort of flower bush would kind of grow. And, you know, I don't know the amount of time, but apparently they would say, like, at night, it was literally, like, self-illuminated. Like, the petals of the flowers would glow.
Man. I mean, other stuff started being thrown around the house, too, like bottles and just sort of your typical poltergeist activity, somewhat, I won't say unrelated to the heads, but just not involving the heads, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Robsons' neighbors, a family with the last name Dodd, were affected. You know, the activity itself, the poltergeist activity, was less consistent, but there were some similarities. Sometimes, though, like the Dodd's children's hair would just be like pulled in the middle of the night. Terrifying.
Yeah.
But even scarier than like getting your hair pulled in the middle of the night is what happened to Ellen Dodd, the mom of the neighbor. I mean, the neighbor, Ellen Dodd's the mom over at the neighbor's house, okay? Mm-hmm. Her and her daughter were kind of up late one evening when all of a sudden they both witnessed a half man, quote, half beast entering the room. You know, obviously they were panicked, they screamed, but the creature didn't. Basically, the creature seemed like kind of indifferent to them and just left the room. And they could hear it kind of going down the stairs. They described it as if on hind legs. Later on, they went downstairs. They found that the front door was open. Mm-hmm. And things were kind of like rummaged around as if the creature had been looking for something.
And this is like the goat man, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which she would say, and I quote, half human, half sheep-like. That's how she sort of explained this thing.
Man.
Yeah. And I think she did. There's sort of some discrepancy between her saying it was, I think originally it was on its hind legs, and then like as it walked out the room, like it went back down on all fours, or the opposite of that. It's sort of, it's a little murky, but I mean, even that alone is like sort of an interesting little detail, though.
Yeah, some sort of like, it's weird. So here we are.
Yeah.
Now we've got these heads that they found. There's all this crazy, weird poltergeist-like activity that's happening that never occurred before. Everything from these heads doing things on their own, bottles being thrown, hair being pulled, and now we've got a dadgum shape-shifting entity that's seemingly, in my opinion, after reading that report, looking for these items, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because that I feel like that's like a big, sort of a big thing that may, a lot of times is sort of looked over, is the fact that like none of the neighbors, none of the Robson family, none of them had ever had any sort of weird paranormal anything in their houses. No hauntings, because I think a lot of people say, well, or at least from, you know, some of the discourse online, you see that like a lot of people are saying, well, you know, this person had 2 young daughters, so apparently it was like, you know, poltergeist activity, and it was probably there before, and you know, they just sort of gave it a face by finding these like little heads. And like, I was actually thinking about this the other day, just how, and again, going back to us growing up in the 80s, just how like sort of commonplace it is to just to look at something and be like, oh, well, there's like, and not always a little girl, but mostly a young girl, like, you know, prepubescent, going into puberty. It's like that just became like such the common thing to be like, oh, this is just like poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of thinking that like, much like we were sort of conditioned to think everything was built on an Indian burial ground, I kind of think that, like, I don't know how much I believe that anymore. I feel like the poltergeist thing, I don't know, it's just kind of a way to sort of science it up, when in reality, it's like, I mean, yeah, you got a 50-50 chance whether there's going to be like a little boy or a little girl in there. So it's like, I don't know. To me, it feels sort of like little girls have got like the bad end of the stick for years.
Yeah, kind of. I think, and I remember, I swear I remember reading this in, not Passport to Magonia. Well, maybe, but certainly in Where the Footprints End. And they talk about that correlation. And I think it's just like there's a larger kind of, I don't know, reporting.
Sort of like percentage.
Right? Like, a larger percentage of the reports of poltergeist activity do sort of revolve around that.
But I mean, I think it's also worth noting that, like, okay, if you look at that, like, I mean, especially for you and I, like, we have kids, and who would be the demographic that would, like, if something did happen, if they did experience something scary, who's going to be the first one that's going to come running and like tell you about it? It's going to be a little girl.
Yeah.
I mean, I have 2 girls, so that's all I know.
Little kids in general, but
yeah. But like,
I don't know. That is interesting. I mean, I wonder. I know that there are, and I just didn't dive into it because I saw something about it. There are like theories and some interesting, I think, writings from some of these paranormal researchers and stuff that kind of study that correlation and have theories behind why. So I think that'd be something cool to dive into sometime for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, it can even be linked into like Jewish mysticism and what they refer to as like the menstruum, which is like this sort of like feminine like energy, that like only women have, and like, I mean, it's sort of an ancient way of, an archaic way of looking at things, but like I think that's part of the reason that they say that, like, women, like, their cycles will link up, and like it's like all tied into like that, and it's like the Earth's like magnetics and like the moon, and like it's like they're sort of tied to this sort of divine like power, if you will. So like I think that's a lot of times like that is sort of some of the correlation with like the poltergeist stuff is like woman's like, or a girl's going into puberty, and it's like that sort of change is taking place, and like I mean, it's interesting.
It is interesting. It's also interesting. I know we're kind of like veering off a little bit here, but it is interesting to me too, though, man, that like if you think about it in those terms, like throughout history, it's like you've got in like traditional sort of Christianity and stuff, anyone that holds like any sort of power is male.
Right.
And then you've got like anybody that's evil, which is now we've got poltergeist activity happening. It's like everything bad points to the girls. Everything good
that's
is
what I'm
available
saying.
to the guys. Yeah, it's kind of lame.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly what I was thinking the other day of like, man, like, is this like sort of cultural conditioning, like, and trust me, I'm the last person that's like, woke, quote unquote woke or whatever. But like, I was thinking about that, as a father of 2 little girls, like, it's sort of like, well, how long has this been sort of the going consensus with a lot of these things? And also, like, where did it come from? Like, was it tied into like religion or?
And you can probably help me out with this, dude. I remember hearing something when I was little, and I don't know if it is truly biblical or if it's just something that my mom was saying or my dad. Like, I remember reading something somewhere or hearing something where it was like, you hear a lot about like a heavenly father, right? But like somebody's like theory was that like you don't hear about a heavenly mother because her name is so sacred that like even to speak it could destroy you, kind of thing.
Well, a lot of that was like the name of God with like, God, not Yeshua.
But I mean, like even to like write it down. So in other words, like, even just to say the word God and Jehovah and all these things, it's written down.
Like
but
the Elohim,
like,
and
it was like, and I don't know if it was like a book I read. I don't know where it came from, but basically that it was just like you can't even write it. We don't even know. It's not even mentioned because that's how like. So then like I'm saying all that to say this, that like maybe in fact, like, although it seems as though us dudes have a lot of power and stuff, maybe truly, like, because, I mean, God, man, if you really think about it in terms of even just biologically, women do have a lot of power. I mean, like, our sort of contribution to the creation of life is pretty minuscule. And
I mean, we can
even
open
say
pickle
microscopic. But what now?
I mean, we can open pickle jars. So.
Yeah, we can open pickle jars. But like, God. Anyway, I don't know. It's just interesting. So maybe, in other words, those bad entities are targeting the females for a reason.
Well, and again, not to like continue to drive this boat away from the dock, but I think what you're talking about, like with you can't even write the name of God. I feel like that's like super, like early like Jewish, something tied with that, you know, and it's kind of linked with, you know, writing the name of God on like the golem. And that was the thing that's what like gave him life and brought him to life. I do know that like there is, I've heard this before, this sort of theory that like basically like the word of God or the name of God is the thing that like created creation. So like, you know, for us looking into the sort of paranormal side of this is like, well, maybe it wasn't like the name per se, but it was like the name and the sound that your voice made when you spoke the name of God, like the original, like
Otherwise known as a password.
yeah,
Hey, man, I'm serious here.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it's like, you know, then you get into like the sound, and it's like, okay, well, now we're getting into like the pyramids or Coral Castle, which, by the way, and again, I'm full speed away from the dock, but I've gotten into this new thing. I'm not gonna get into it, but it's called like Tartaria,
Marijuana.
in the mud flood, reefer madness. But it's this crazy
thing.
Huh?
Sorry, man. I go ahead. Sorry. It's just, to me, it was just so funny. It's just like, hey, man, I've gotten into this new thing. It's called marijuana.
It's called marijuana. Maybe you've heard of it. No, it's like it's this sort of concept that like history is not really as we think it is. But a lot of it is tied into this idea that all these ancient civilizations that we know today, even like the Pumapunku and like Chichen Itza and Göbekli Tepe, these are all these ancient archaeological sites, and they're finding that like, oh, wait a minute, these things were built on top of other sites that happened, you know, maybe hundreds of thousands of years even before that. But anyway, all that to say is like you start looking into like the earliest sort of cultures and stuff. It's like Mesopotamia and like the Sumerians and like, you know, onto the like Egyptians and stuff. And it's crazy this thing, because you start noticing like within all cultures, all over, like whether it's South America, whether it's Egypt, whether it's all over these places, you start seeing that like a lot of times they're like holding this little bag or like a box with like a handle, and then they're always seen holding a pine cone, which a lot of people, and I'm
Where
one
are
of
you
these
seeing
people,
this now? Where am I supposed to see this?
Oh, it's literally all across the globe. You can find like,
but I mean, what is it on? These are just artifacts, or like it's a
no. Well, it's like sculptures or
okay.
reliefs or even like petroglyphs or hieroglyphics. It's in like all these things, and they're always like the king or whatever, or like I guess the pharaoh technically in Egypt. They're always seen holding this like little bag in one hand, and then holding this like this weird sort of pine cone in the other. And I've heard like, I think Terrence McKenna, he's like a big guy that gets into like the power of like psilocybin and mushrooms and stuff. You know, he talks about, and it links into ayahuasca and like seeing everything in these like sort of like hexagrams and like everything, like those patterns. And if you look at like a pine cone, it's like, you know, is that the same thing? And
dude,
I don't know.
There's this incredible book, man, that reminds me of, where it's just like the patterns of nature or something. I don't think that's the title of it, but it goes into like, even just like strip away all the outside of the box stuff that you just kind of talked about a little bit. Even just those patterns, man, it's just insane. Like some of the stuff, like mathematical patterns.
Right. Yeah.
And like equations, dude, inside of these things. Like even if just like, I mean, and symmetry and stuff, it's incredible. Like even just like cut a bell pepper in half type thing. You know, I mean, just it's just mind blowing. And I do love that concept, dude. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm giving you an assignment.
Okay.
You don't really do too well with assignments. You know, if you remember back to when I was like, hey man, make a playlist of summer songs. And then you're like, anyways, number 1, Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm like, dude, that's a band, bro. That's not a song. Anyway, not so good with assignments. That's okay. We understand. You know, everybody does things differently. We're not making fun of you. We're supportive here on our show. What I'm saying is, here's your assignment. And this is an announcement too to everybody listening. And if you want to listen, then you got to be a part of the Patreon, because you're going to do a Patreon episode. I don't care if it's 5 hours long about the mud flood stuff, dude. Because I'm super interested in it, but I don't even want to look into it because I'm charging you with that quest. And you're going to deliver it to me, because I love those kind of episodes, man.
Yeah. Well,
is that? Can we agree on that? We're putting it out there in the universe. People are listening. Our patrons are listening to this episode.
Mm-hmm.
You're in charge.
My answer
is wait for it.
My answer is yes and no. The reason why is because this idea is so sort of all encompassing. Like there's so much to it that I'm actually trying to get. Well, no. Well, yeah, I am overwhelmed a little bit. But I am actually in the process of reaching out to this guy who has basically written the book about it and having him on. So
okay, well,
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that it's so interesting that I don't think it needs to be only on the Patreon. Maybe we have like a sort of
you're right. This
round table.
This is how interesting it is. It's so interesting that on an episode where we're doing seemingly nothing about it, we ended up bringing it up, and we also did last week. But here's the thing. There is a connection, and hopefully if I remember, we'll get back to it, but we got a lot to cover. So let me just...
After these messages, we'll be right back.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, and I think a little fear. But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's gonna be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right, man. And this is where it's so funny, man. And look, if you have kids, if you don't have kids, here's the thing. If you're planning on having kids, if you're a parent currently, you'll kind of understand what I'm saying here. This is almost a testament to why it's important to understand what the beep your kids are bringing into your house. Because just like any good parent, they started figuring things out like, man, okay, let's try to figure this out. Nothing happened before. Nothing in the house was moving.
Yep.
Nobody was grabbing my hair in the middle of the night.
Yep.
Ouch, ouch, you're on my hair, just the tip. But now all this stuff is happening. When did this start? Well, they basically chalked it up to these heads.
Yeah.
Now, this is where these folks differ from me. I think my immediate reaction would be just put them in the trash, them in the garbage. You guys will get it.
See, but I couldn't.
Well, and I say that, and there's like this little thread of, because that was kind of their initial reaction, But then it's like they had this like afterthought that was like, I think we should get someone to look at this, somebody with some kind of expertise. And so, especially since, things are happening with their neighbors and all this, they thought, well, if we give them, if we throw it in the trash and someone else finds them, then essentially bad's going to happen to them. So, they're nice people. And so they found this doctor. Her name's Dr. Ann Ross.
Yeah. She's basically was in the area. She was an expert in Celtic artifacts. I think this was back in like 1968. She would go on to write a book called Pelican.
She wrote a book about pelicans.
Pagan Celtic Britain, Studies in Iconography and Tradition, and then Druids, Preachers of Immortality. And so she's like an actual scholar. Like these are all books that you would find in universities and stuff.
Yeah, very well respected historian.
Yeah, she would also go on to before we go to that, I just want to clarify. Like, I guess the original family, Colin and Leslie Robson,
the kids.
I guess it sort of created a buzz around the area, and so people started talking, and it was like, well, we have these two little heads, and like, if you just look at it logically, it's like all these crazy things started happening only when we dug up the heads, much like the Charunga. And so the buzz happened, and then that's how Dr. Ann Ross was basically sort of brought in.
Yeah, because I think like there's like, and we'll definitely put it up on our Instagram page. There's like a newspaper clip with these two kids with their cute little like British haircuts holding up one of these heads, and then there's like, and the title of the article is something like "Family Fear: Another Night of Terror." And so I think you're right. I think like Dr. Ann Ross kind of saw this. And what's interesting here too, man, before we kind of start to talk about the things that happened to her, not to spoil that surprise, is she was a big researcher into this thing called the cult of the head. And I had no idea what the heck that was. And so I looked into it. So there's this quote from one of her books that says, "The cult of the human head constitutes a persistent theme throughout all aspects of Celtic life, spiritual and temporal, and the symbol of the severed head may be regarded as the most typical and universal of their religious attitudes." She goes on to say, like, headhunting as a proof of prowess, and the taking of the head as the seat, they thought of the head as the seat of the soul and the source of spiritual potency. And this kind of is a theme that's actually quite popular throughout, the dawn of the historical period, actually. And, there are places in Ireland and other sort of like Celtic areas where you would find these like either head carvings or sometimes, dude, even like people's heads sort of used inside of, okay, so imagine like a stone wall where they cut like a hole into it, or maybe they use like a cement of some sort to make a wall, and then there's like a human skull like in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Throughout Europe in different castles and that kind of thing. They basically say like, look, the archaeological and sort of artistic evidence for this cult of the head is kind of too extensive to kind of catalog real briefly, but there are, for example, areas of like southern Gaul and where like 15 male skulls were found, several of them still bearing the marks of the spikes with which they had been fixed for display.
I mean, that sounds like a Vlad the Impaler type.
Yeah, right. In Etremont in Provence, a Celtic tribe called the Sali or Saluvi constructed a shrine at which, when the Romans routed the tribe in around 125 BC, they found assorted statues, one pillar displaying a mouthless face with closed eyes, and a lot of like human head remains and all this other stuff around it. Dr. Ross also, in her pagan Celtic Britain, divided there's different categories of these sort of like shrines. Okay, there's some with like multiple heads, there's some with like that she called horned heads. There's heads without attributes, that are potentially portraying like deities and stuff. There's one called the Gorgon heads. And despite the misuse of this classical name Gorgon, these heads appear to be similar to green man images.
Ooh, see? All roads lead to Pan. That's what Pan is.
And some of them, including one that I found, man, really kind of look like an alien head.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of do. I mean, I don't know if that's like a sort of a pareidolia effect where we're just like looking.
Dude, I don't know, man. Hold on.
But it is pretty.
Check this out, bro.
Pretty interesting.
I'm going to show you a picture.
Oh, you're saying one that's not,
dude.
Not one of the Hexham Heads?
What the?
You're saying like another head?
Oh, yeah. Now, take a look at this, dude. Tell me what shape that looks. You think that's pareidolia?
No. No, I thought you were talking about the Hexham Heads.
Oh, no.
But no, that's definitely...
Dude, come on, man.
Honestly, though, dude, and I don't know, maybe it's the sort of the eye pupil shape. I mean, it kind of looks sort of reptilian a little too, which, a lot of people say that, like, that's tied into the Egyptians and stuff. There were a lot of, like, sort of reptilian, like, themed, like, looks, about them. The early pharaohs.
In short, like, the head was not only a prized sort of heroic trophy, but also a profoundly religious symbol, sometimes representative of a deity and generally suggestive of sort of supernatural wisdom and power. So that is what kind of got her interested in these little bitty, very strange looking heads. Little did she know that by bringing them into her house, more strange things were going to occur.
Yes, and let me also say again that this lady is like a full-on, like, older, scholar. Like, she, as far as what I've read, she was not prone to, like, even though she was sort of the expert on all this stuff, she wasn't prone to, like, believe superstitions. She was very sort of straight-laced scholar, like, only the facts kind of thing. And so the fact that, like, she started witnessing or having these encounters, even add to the weirdness. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, dude, for sure, man. It's always like that kind of stuff that we find in these kind of accounts, man, that kind of separate us from just being like the podcast version of the National Enquirer.
Yeah, right.
It's like these threads of people that are highly respected, academics or scientists or, whatever, that these things happen to. Now, I'm not saying like because she died in 2012, I believe, but the late Dr. Ann Ross didn't just make it up. I'm just saying that the fact that someone that's well-respected has never had anything like this, besides in their past. I mean, in stark contrast, I think of the lady who is literally on TikTok just babbling and making up words, but also including real Spanish and saying that she communicates with aliens.
Oh, yeah. Right.
In stark contrast to that, you've got Dr. Ann Ross who, is just kind of like, hey, this happened. It's weird. Boom. Okay. So one night after getting the heads, Dr. Ross also saw a part animal, part man creature. And I'm just going to quote like her exact account. Are you ready? She said, it was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black against the white door, and it was half animal and half man. The upper part, I would have said, was a wolf, and the lower part was human. And it was covered with a kind of black, very dark fur. I went out and just saw it clearly, and then it disappeared. Something made me run after it. A thing I wouldn't normally have done, but I felt compelled to run after it. I got out of bed, and I ran, and I could hear it going down the stairs. Then it disappeared towards the back of the house.
Yeah. I think she said it was heading in the direction of like the kitchen, but then when she got there, it was gone.
I mean, even a shapeshifter needs a midnight snack,
I mean...
So what's crazy, too, is like that her daughter mentioned days after that having seen a werewolf-like creature on the stairs that vanished down the corridor. Again, it seems like whatever it is, this creature, gosh, in a way, it kind of sounds awfully like the puka.
Yeah, it kind of does.
You know, it seems like this entity, this creature, this whatever, is looking for something.
The other thing that is interesting about when it was in Dr. Ann Ross's sort of possession is same kind of thing. Her daughters would have the experience of like their hair being pulled. I even found another place where it said that if they were in the room of like a television, you know, and back then you had like 4 channels and, you know, that was it.
Yeah.
But they said that if they were in the room, it would almost seem like the TV was like turning to like a different frequency, like in between channels almost. Like it was trying to like communicate. And, you know, I don't know if that's sort of conjecture, but that's pretty interesting. It was also said that she would experience it like, you know, she would be sitting, I guess, you know, working or typing or whatever, and she would have these like intensely like cold sort of like the temperature would just totally drop where she was, like in the room that she was in. And then another thing is the door would just like, it's pretty obnoxious when you think about it, but like just imagine you're sitting there like working or whatever, and like your door just comes like, it's like somebody kicked the door open. And this would just happen, and of course nobody would be there.
It's not hard for us to imagine because, again, we have children.
I mean, yeah, that's
how
true.
they enter a room.
Yeah. But dude, I mean, imagine like at night, you're laying in bed and all of a sudden,
yeah, man,
your door rips open and nobody's there.
Yeah, no. Or you're laying there, or you're. I read another thing where she was like taking apparently, I think she was taking care of her father, who was also a doctor, Dr. Richard Feacham, and he was ill in bed. And as she was taking the meal up to him, the werewolf standing on the stairs. Another time, a lot of the family members, including like I think her son, reported that they would just see a dark figure all around the house.
Yeah, right.
The cats in the house would, at odd times, just arch their backs as if they saw something that the humans didn't and hiss.
I mean, we've talked about it before. Those cats are tuned in.
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah, just more poltergeist activity like the husband, Paul Ross, like described like one night they were eating dinner together and they just hear something heavy drop in the hallway. And I think just like the Robsons, it was kind of like, look, enough's enough. Something's going on here. She really just felt like it had this like wicked sort of radiant energy coming from it or coming from them. And that perhaps these heads were originally part of this Celtic sort of... she just felt like these things needed to leave her house.
I do think it's interesting that, like, all within the same area, you would have, like, pretty much the one person on the planet who would know the most about this stuff. Like, being able to take these in her possession. I just think that's really pretty cool. Like, out of any of these sort of Celtic things, like, you know, she was kind of like the expert, you know, in like the early pagan Celtic Britain. Yeah. So like I find it interesting that like, you know, she already lived in the area and it was sort of synchronicity in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's kind of murky, the timeline from when after it leaves Dr. Ann Ross, I feel like the timeline's a little scattered. Like all of my sources are kind of saying sort of different things.
Yeah. I think basically after that they go to, so she was at the University of Southampton.
Southampton, that's it, yeah.
So she took it upon herself to take these heads into her house, huh? So even whenever they were there, basically, another professor, I don't know if you want me to dive into this part, but this is when things start to look or start to seem, I think, well, if you're a skeptic already, this is when it starts to kind of be like, what's going on here? And then it gets even crazier. So there was this chemist there, Professor Hodgson, who was a chemist at this Southampton University that Dr. Ross was a part of. I'm not sure if she was, or how she was associated with it. But this is now in 1972. And he kind of performed a chemical test on them. And I actually have, let me see here. I have like the original like printing of the report. And it says, it's weird because the report's titled Report on Heads 4 and 5 from Hexham. And it says, General Observations. The material from which the heads have been, now keep in mind, this is literally from his report, okay? The material from which the heads have been fashioned consists of uniformly large grains of quartz, 2 millimeter diameter on average, set in a very fine-grained matrix. The grains are extremely well-rounded and polished with no indication of partial solution or of secondary growth. There are numerous sandstones belonging to the upper Carboniferous succession which outcrop in the Hexham district, but none of them bear any similarity to the material from which these heads have been formed. Indeed, the material is unlike any natural sandstone. So then that was the general observation section, and then there's specific observations. It says, in a natural sandstone, there is invariably a predominance of grains of a particular diameter, but also with a fairer proportion of grains of greater and lesser diameters. On analysis, such a sandstone provides a cumulative with one prominent peak. I think this is getting a little too... Let's just jump to the conclusions here. He says, the material from which the heads have been formed is an artificial cement. The sand grains in it are probably derived from the seashore, where wave action sorts out material to a very uniform size and produces a high degree of rounding and polishing. There are often well-rounded calcareous fragments from seashells. In such deposit, though, without disaggregation, it would not be possible to conform this point in the case of the Hexham Heads. If the heads are of modern origin, no doubt the quartz grains come from builders' sand. If they are of ancient origin, presumably some enterprising Hexham Briton, struggling through the swamps of the Tyne Valley, may have visited the seaside and have come back with a satchel of sand, which he subsequently mixed with ground-up limestone and water. There is an adequate local supply of limestone. No further comment regarding the polished surface of the heads beyond those made by Professor Hodson needs be added. So it's interesting because this is the beginning of, again, when it starts to seem like, hey, you know, these heads potentially, well, the problem was that the heads couldn't be dated with radiocarbon because they had no organic parts or traces. So although the stone was local to Hexham, according to this chemist, it seems like they were made of some sort of modern, potentially, cement.
Yeah, well, it's weird because so here's one thing about these heads that, you know, after they would leave Dr. Ann Ross, they were held in the Newcastle Museum of Antiquities for a while. And an archaeologist and curator named Roger Mickett and David Smith, that I think they were the ones who kind of, and you know, I don't know if there was like a sort of a motive here, but they were the ones who, like, from the get-go were sort of like, yeah, these are fake, let's not worry about them. And there's a guy actually by the name of Paul Screeton who would write a pamphlet back in 1981 called Tales of the Hexham Heads. It's like a 20-page pamphlet. But then in 2012, write a full book. It's on Amazon called The Quest for the Hexham Heads. And he would say in his book that Mickett would describe them as just plain old archaeological material, which is a bit like describing the Shroud of Turin as just a blanket. I love that quote. But like, you could even see, like, there's a bunch of photos of this Roger Mickett guy, and he's like taking pictures, like holding them up, like rolling his eyes, or kind of like, you know, like kind of making a joke of it. But then they would sort of be passed back and forth to all these other different places, these different universities and museums and stuff. And like, that was the thing that was weird, is like some people would do testing and it would say, oh, well, there's nothing modern about this. It's not molded, you know, like something made out of like a cement or anything like that. But which, I mean, even if it was like some type of cement, I mean, you know, the early Greeks, you know, were capable of creating like a cement type mixture. So it doesn't mean it's necessarily modern, but this guy was saying that they were carved, but then these other people are saying, oh, well, it's just like cast or in like a mold.
It's interesting too, like at the end of that guy's report, although he says like, hey, it's formed by an artificial cement, later he kind of makes sure to note that like, if it wasn't by some modern person like currently, then then the possibility does exist that it could have been someone like ancient who got some sand from the coast and made these with some limestone that was in the area. So they could still, he didn't really like draw a conclusion that's just like these things are worthless or anything.
Let's get into our guy Dez. Yeah.
We will return after these messages.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So if that wasn't enough to kind of make you go, well, I don't know, guys. I think we need to talk about Des Craigie.
Yeah.
Take it away.
So as the 70s would continue on, there was a man named Desmond Craigie, or Des Craigie, who basically came out and said he was the creator of the heads. He said that he made them back in 1956 for his daughter while he was actually living in the house where the Robsons, found the heads and where they would live later. Apparently his story is he actually made 3 heads, and there was like a third head which would become damaged and, be thrown away. But I guess his whole story is like he worked for this company that dealt in concrete, and I guess like his daughter on the way to work or something. It's a little cheesy in a way to me. It's like apparently he says his daughter was asking like what he did, and so he was like, well, let me show you. And he went and he made these heads. And
hey man, that's not cheesy. My kids ask me what I do, and I framed him an insurance policy on there. Why is that weird?
No, dude. I do this stuff too. I'm just saying, like, if you're going to come out and like take credit for these heads, it's sort of like it seems real convenient. Especially, it's like it just seems like poor writing. If it were like a story.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like your daughter was asking what I did for a living.
So I decided to carve some heads out of stone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I think he would be the one to kind of, publicly start shedding a little bit of doubt on it with some people, which the thing is like, it was like sort of researched later, and even Desmond Craigie, he like made these other replicas to demonstrate how he, basically how he did it. And, these were supposedly like exactly like it. But then, once they were taken in, it was like, no, these aren't even close to the Hexham Heads. Just in the creation, like whether it's carving or molding, it's like these are 2 completely different things. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he got a lucky batch of sandstone, and like he was able to make the Hexham Heads. The one thing that I do think, I'm not dismissing this guy entirely. Yeah. But I do think that it's interesting that these heads have like little nubs for like a neck. And if you look at like the reason I say that is because like if you look at like old baby dolls, like baby dolls, the vintage ones, you would have like a cloth body filled with cotton,
And like
then
the
you'd
heads
have
would fit into the...
Yeah, the neck would like basically fit in. So it's like, and that's the one thing if you look at a lot of this, like, I'm a big fan of like the crystal skulls and a lot of those sort of skull type artifacts, like you never really see a neck. So I feel like with and I could be, I don't totally.
No, but that's a good point, dude. That like the reason why they had those necks was instead of it just like you would have all these like, okay, by the time Barbies came around and they were plastic, it was easy to change out their clothes and all this kind of stuff, I guess. Same with like old school G.I. Joes, right? Well, like the old baby dolls that you're talking about, like you just like be like, well, I don't feel like that outfit. I'll take the porcelain head, which is the most valuable part.
Yeah, right.
And place it on this other outfit. And doing so, like you're inserting the head. I mean, you're like the neck goes into like the whole of the body. Did we just explain how babies are made on here?
Well, my thing though is I don't know, and obviously Dr. Ann Ross would know this, but I don't know if the necks being included on these heads were commonplace for like these ancient Celtic these other Celtic heads that she's sort of the professional with. I don't know if that was a common thing to have like a neck, but to me that was like that. It is a little weird, and it's something that you just wouldn't think would be there unless there's like another reason, or you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like that, and like I said, I don't totally believe this guy, but I'm not throwing out everything that he says. But I feel like that may be the most sort of, I don't know, believable part of his.
Because I don't know if you said this yet, but I mean, basically the reason why they're even in that garden is that he, like you said, his daughter didn't really care for him after he made him. I mean, they are kind of weird looking. So
yeah,
here's what I don't understand. Like, he didn't live at that address, right?
No, he did live there a long time ago.
Like in the 50s.
Then, in the 50s. And then he would move, and then I guess his dad was renting maybe from him. It's a little.
No, I didn't know that part. Okay, that's what my question was. But essentially, like, the daughter didn't like him, buried him in the dirt. Fast forward 20 years or so, and these kids, like, unearthed them.
Well, and that's the thing too. So him and his daughter lived in the house. They moved out. I guess he still owned the house, and his dad rented the house from him up until the year before the Robsons moved in. Mm-hmm. So there is like connectivity, but I mean, I'm with you. Like I don't know. It's like,
I mean,
what are the odds of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, well, let me pose a different question. Because the answer to that is, well, I mean, the odds are about the same as them just being ancient. It's like 50-50 there. But what are the odds that he made these for his daughter? She didn't like him. They end up buried in the garden. And then after unearthing them 20 years later, all this weird happens. What are those odds? Like, I don't know. Which
that's sort of the common denominator.
Yeah, and like you said too, like the ones that he tried to, or the ones that he made later were like pretty crappy, didn't have the same quality. Who knows if he had access to the same kind. There's a lot of variables here. Who knows if he had the access to the same tools or quality of sandstone, like you said, or at this point maybe he's just old as heck. If you asked, one of our grandfathers to do something, chances are they're gonna be like, I went on bed, or like, here, hold this screwdriver right here,
Yeah.
And so maybe the quality, maybe that's part of the reason. So there's a lot of factors, right? So who knows if he's telling the truth? But what's interesting to me is that, like, after all of this, apparently Dr. Ross kind of continued to sort of express that she believed that they were ancient, or at least, at the very, very least, evil. And so there's this rumor and claim that came out in a book that basically said that they think that Dr. Ross thought that if, in fact, the heads were made by a modern-day person, that they were a product of a black magic cult given to worship ancient evil deities. And so that this energy, this evil energy that followed them around was because of that. So in other words, regardless of the mystery of whether or not they are ancient or more modern, maybe perhaps that is the source of this this evil energy.
I mean, I like it. I mean, one thing that is interesting is like with it, you know, and we've talked a little bit about this before, but like, you know, this idea that there's so many accounts of like paranormal happenings happening around like quartz. Apparently it's sort of known to like hold vibration and hold on to things. Sort of like, I believe
Superman.
Like I think the Churunga stone was...
Oh, yeah, right.
even quartz-based, too.
Churunga! Or it had the properties that you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I wonder... To me, that's interesting. Like, I remember when I talked to Timothy Renner from... And I've said this before, on his podcast, Strange Familiars, about, like, the orbs and all the weird stuff I was seeing around my house. Like, one of the first questions he asked is, like, well, were there any quartz in the area? And... I'm like, yeah, it's literally on a giant hill made of quartz, you know. So I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe these little heads, like, were able to, like what you're saying, like they were able to store information or whatever, like the Churunga stone.
Hold on, man, before I lose this thought.
Yeah, get in.
This is so interesting to me. Okay, what if, man? Okay. Because the other day, I think it may have been whenever I started to research this, and then I saw this, and I was like, I don't want to get too deep on one side. There are people that have talked about and written about how quartz can store information.
Yep.
And there's this idea that, like, basically, or this theory that it can store information much like, I mean, just think, it really is like Superman, for the lack of a better comparison. And if you're not a Superman fan or don't know what I'm talking about, then I'll explain a little bit. Essentially, imagine like a thumb drive or a floppy disk or whatever it is, but instead of that, it is just a piece of quartz that holds tons of information. And I mean, like, more than, you know, like we've got these external hard drives now that hold like, you know, 10 tetrabytes or whatever. Imagine like a small piece of crystal that can hold like billions and billions of pieces of information, okay?
Right.
So there's that idea. What if there's a couple things I think that would be fun to think about is, what if it's all true in this story, okay? In other words, what if the dude really did innocently carve these for his daughter? His daughter didn't like him, she chucked him in the garden. Then, because they have this like quartz property, what if there's this other sort of undiscovered ability that quartz has that is some sort of like channeling mechanism for spiritual things or whatever.
So a focus item.
Man, dude, we do it every time. We turn everything into Dungeons and Dragons, but you know what I'm saying? And so in other words, like, you lived near that quartz outcrop or the quartz hill, and maybe that energy, I don't know, man. I don't know.
No. I like where you're heading. But I think we need to clarify, like, a focus item for anyone that cares in Dungeons and Dragons is like, say you're a wizard or a sorcerer or any sort of magic user, you usually have the option of having, like, whether it's a staff like Gandalf or a little like sundial if you're like a druid, or like some crystal or something where you focus your magic. So anytime you're casting a spell, you'll sort of hold that thing up.
Yeah.
And it'll sort of it'll be channeled through that stone or staff or whatever. But I like the idea that, well, maybe it's all of the above. Maybe it is, maybe the sandstone that was gathered by Desmond Craigie, and he did make them later, maybe that sandstone was from an area that you know, ancient druids or whatever would do these, you know, sort of pagan Celtic rituals or whatever, and maybe it was already embedded in these stones, and he just happened to grab the sandstone to make a cement mix to make these like little heads or whatever. You know, and energy is it never. I just said minergy. God, minergy. But it, you know, it can't be created or destroyed, so it's like obviously, if this is true, if in fact, God Almighty, these quartz do, sort of hold on to things or sort of store energy, it would still be there, whether it's ground into like a cement mixture or taken out whole,
Stone tape.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, dude, I just don't even know. It continues to blow my mind. Ever since starting this podcast, all of the connectivity between all of these things is just mind-blowing. And perhaps we're connecting them on our own and finding the similarities between them all. But still, it's interesting that we end up talking about another phenomenon that sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah,
anyway,
right.
Let me ask you this question, man. Where are they now?
So that's sort of the problem. Nobody knows. My guess is that the Smithsonian had something to do with it.
I knew it. Oh, God. I imagine this like this posh-looking, like very smart-dressed English gentleman is just like sitting, it's 1975 or 77 or something.
I think
like
78 was the last year that it was.
He's just like drinking a cup of tea, and it's like all of a sudden, like his watch is like,
I thank you.
Doing something weird. He's like, He like flips it open. He's like, this is Agent Smith. And it's just right. He's like the British Smithsonian's arm of,
Well, one of the interesting things, and again, I don't know, the research is hard on this topic because there's sort of multiple angles, that people will have. I mean, much like us or you, the listener, we all have like different opinions on what we think these things could be. But it is kind of hard to find. Like, I've heard that, I guess they were at, and I don't even know the last university that technically would have had them, but it's just said that they were like given to another man, and like you don't even have the name. And then there's some accounts where they say the man and the heads have completely disappeared, which is what I love.
Yeah.
So
although I did find something that I think I want to save for the patrons, man. I really do.
Okay.
That like opens up this entire other thing that I stumbled upon. Haven't even told you about it yet. And
man, I'm psyched.
It's wild.
Okay, I'm excited.
So what you're telling me is they vanished.
Yeah, right.
No one knows where they're at. The mystery lives.
Yeah, that's what they say. Which is kind of weird because, like, to me, that's such an odd thing. I mean, I get it. I get, like...
It's a little bit of it was all a dream kind of ending.
Yeah, it's like you've had it's like St. Elsewhere, like the 80s show. It's like, it was all a dream in the mind of a 12-year-old boy. No, I just find it weird, like... And I know that it's possible as far as like cataloging and like these museums and like antiquities museums and stuff, but these things were like such a big deal. There's like multiple papers, that cover this stuff, and so especially in the area, they were totally widely known. Mm-hmm. I mean, even before they were given to the universities, like that's how Dr. Ann Ross even found out about them, because it was in like newspaper articles and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it is weird to me that it would go on to be mentioned in a Linda Godfrey book, Hunting the American Werewolf, Beastmen in Wisconsin and Beyond. By the way, Linda Godfrey's like a Beast of Bray Road. She's a legend.
Big time.
She's no longer with us, but she is a legend in the field. But she covered it as well as...
Dude, she passed away?
I think so, yeah.
I don't know, man.
I think she passed away like last year.
Dang.
It's also mentioned in 2 articles of the Fortean Times, and one I was able to find, and this will be just before we go. I know we got to get out of here, but actually, the Fortean Times, they were able to actually interview Colin Robson, one of the original kids. It says that, like, so these are basically his questions. It says, could you tell me a bit more about when your budgie died and buried him in the garden? And I think... Is a budgie a bird or a dog?
I've never heard of that word.
I haven't either until this. We'll say dog, but oddly enough, I feel like it could be a bird. The question, he says, I've read that you thought the Heads had killed the budgie. Is that true? He said, yes, we did have a budgie that died, but we don't know if it was the Heads that caused it, as far as I remember. Yes, we buried the budgie in the garden. I then went on to ask about the strange glowing bush which had been reported in the garden. I wondered about the exact position of the bush and whether that related in any way to where the budgie had been buried. So he says, when you buried the budgie, it was reported that a glowing bush grew in the garden. Do you remember anything else about this? And do you believe it was the Heads? He says, yes, he was buried in the garden, and yes, there was a strange small bush that grew in the corner of our backyard after finding the Heads, but the bush grew in the exact place that the Heads were unearthed. And yes, the bush used to have a strange glow at night, almost as if it was producing its own light, which is maybe my favorite part about the whole story.
Yeah, dude.
The question, did the Heads feel hot in your hands when you held them? Colin says, no, the Heads felt actually cold, if anything, but they did make your hands tingle after holding them for a while. Have you ever, wasn't that one of the things with the Chirunga stone?
Yeah, I think so, man.
Another question, have you experienced any other paranormal events at any other time in your life? Yes, I've had quite a few instances, and I do seem to have a sense to pick up presences. So yeah, it's that's like,
man,
the extent of a pretty small article, but I think it's pretty cool that they were able to sort of track down like one of the original kids that found them.
Yeah, man, that's incredible.
Yeah, and you know, this guy had no idea where they ended up either. One thing that I just thought of, I feel like the Desmond Craigie character is a little weird in the fact that like okay, so you know, he lived at the house before. He would have seen all the newspaper reports long before it would have gotten to Dr. Ann Ross.
Yeah,
his dad lived there up until the year prior to them moving, you know, the Robson family moving in the home. I feel like in a normal situation, that guy would have just shown up as soon as he read the paper and it started becoming like sort of buzzworthy. He would have showed up and like explained that to the family, of being like, hey, I made these things, instead of waiting until it goes on to Ann Ross, who writes about it in like national newspapers. It kind of starts blowing up. It was on like the nightly news several times. Like, I mean, it was a big deal over there. And so, I don't know. To me, that sheds a little doubt on his claim that he made them, just because it's like, okay, so now you want to come out, like, now that you live in the area. So obviously you would have heard the buzz about it, but you're only gonna come out and say you made the Heads after their national news. You know, I don't know. There's just something weird about the fact that he wouldn't have like communicated or showed up to the family, you know, that now live in his old house. That's just weird to me.
Weird, man. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, pal, I think that's about it as far as this free feed. Where can we be found?
Well, you can find us on Instagram. Boy, you surprised me with that. Yeah. So if you want to interact with us on a more personal level, but also see like more of our sort of what we call episode artifacts, where we dive further into like the sort of the visual part of what we talk about on our episode, you can find us on Instagram at, you guessed it, That Would Be Rad. You can also check out, and please do, check out our new website at www.thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can listen to episodes directly from the site. You can give us a review straight from the site, or on Apple and Spotify straight from our website. It'll take you there. You can also leave us like a voice memo to either give us a scary story or an interesting story of your own, or just even say, hi, this is so-and-so from wherever you are in the world.
Hey, man, you're doing great work. If you don't mind, get out there and tell one single friend about the show. You know, we all have that one friend who's into weird stuff, and that one person in your life would probably dig the show, because we are those people. Tell a friend, leave some 5-star reviews, go buy some merch on our link tree on Instagram. If you do want to email us, you got something to say, or talk to us about, shoot us a DM in our Instagram messages, or shoot it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Wait, did you already say that?
No.
Okay, good. Any little bit helps as far as like spreading that word and leaving those reviews. They help us get in front of, you know, new ears. So we thank you for it. But I guess that's about it, man. Got anything else?
That's it.
Cool, man. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted.
I'm really going to go for it, honey. Dude, that's one of my favorite.
Which one?
In Vacation, they're like on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Elliott Hotel, and they're under the covers, whatever. And he's like, I'm really going to go for it, honey. Dude, that's...
I mean, boy, when I was a kid, Beverly D'Angelo really did it for me in that first one.
Real thick jaw. Okay.
The shower scene.
Dude, and it's like no, it's R.
Is it
it's rated
R?
R, right?
No, I think it's like PG-13.
One of them is...
I mean, it like full-on shows her in the shower.
I know. Yeah, I'm going to have to watch it after we get done. All right. Oh, man.
None of the stuff's going to be in there, right? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. In late spring... See? You got me off the vibe, man. Hold on. Can't waste time. In late spring of 1971, two brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, were playing in their garden.
Are you sure it's not Robson? You said Robinson. I just want to help. I just want to make sure.
I just want to help. Oh, man. Okay. In late spring, how many times am I going to say in late spring?
Well, you can say it as many times until you get it right.
You know, like you prepare a short intro so that you can just get right to it. And this is what happens. I'm stuck on 4 words here. All right.
Robson.
Man, they just don't tell you about this on the main episodes, huh? All right.